Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about the Cards World Championship for 2023, because the groups for the next stage, the top 128 stage, have been drawn a couple days ago. So we now know the groups. We know the groups of death, and we know the easy groups, quote unquote. And I'm going to be going over all of that today and offering my fantasy bracket, not just for the groups, but the top 32 that seeding will then create, and all the way down to who my predicted winner of the World Championship is going to be, purely based on brackets and how I think certain matchups work. So that's what we have to look forward to. I'm going to go through each of the groups and talk about some of the players. But first, something I wanted to address is, since this isn't like huge news, so it's not worth making a single video on, but 4 players received a competitive ban. Now, they did not originally announce which 4 players these were, but it was pretty easy to figure out once they posted the brackets. So 66 Better, Share the Theory, and HQT18, who, as you can see, got 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in the last month's ranked leaderboard, and therefore should have qualified for top 6. All 3 of these players were removed for account sharing, as well as Top Chef, who got 26th, and also is a top 6 player in June. 66 Better also got top 6 in August. So all of these players have been removed from the OCC, as well as they have been removed from the World Championship. All 4 of these players had qualified for the World Championship. So if you're wondering why these players aren't here, that is why. And they've also been banned from participating in the next month's OCC as well. So, personally, I think account sharing should get you a larger ban. It is not an unknown thing. This is not the first time it's happened in Cards. This is not news to these people. I think they should get much harsher bans. But either way, I am happy that they have been removed from the World Championship, and the World Championship, they took in the next players to get their spot once those players were removed, so they have not had too much of a negative effect on anyone else in that way. So, with that being said, let's roll the intro and just get straight into my bracket predictions.
What a performance there by J King.
J King, full plot armor.
J King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J King is our world champion. J King 7. What? The back-to-back Cards World Champion.
All right, so just a little bit to talk about the format and how these groups were drawn. There were 14 players who were pre-qualified, and you could pre-qualify to the stage of 128 by either winning a season, winning a tournament, so either an OCC Clash, an OCC Ultimate, a Cards Open, etc. And the top 4 from the previous World Championship were automatically pre-qualified. So out of all of that, there was 14 players who got pre-qualified, and as such, those 14 players were seeded into 1 player into each of the first 14 groups. And then after that, all of the players, the remaining players in the 128 who qualified through the in-game play-ins, essentially, all of those players were drawn into the remaining groups. And since some people didn't confirm, some people dropped, etc., there's slightly less than 128. So some of the groups are going to end up with 7, some have 8. I mean, once the day of the tournament arrives, a ton of people aren't going to show up anyways, so it's not a big deal, and it was all drawn randomly. So let's take a look. Here's Group 1, and you see the name in orange. That's the pre-qualified player. So in this case, Group 1, Group Alpha, it is Tang Tang, the pre-qualified player, and then the rest of the group is, well, you can see the names right here. So I'm not going to know all of these players, and I'm not going to talk through all 128 players. Do not worry. But I am going to name or highlight players who I'm familiar with and think could have a bit of a splash on this pool. So in this case, obviously the pre-qualified player is going to be a heavy favorite to win through all of these groups, because all of the pre-qualified players are pre-qualified for a reason. So in this case, Tang Tang, obviously heavy favorite in this group. He's easily one of the top players and top performing players in the last 2 years of Cards. Very, very strong player. But also in this group is Kumashin, who's a bit of a wild card. They've been around for a very long time. They've been in opens. They've been just grinding on ladder. And I do not believe they've ever made a top 8 OCC performance. However, this is somebody who can take down big names. Also in this group, Captain A, they have had one OCC appearance. This is another player who you see on ladder a lot. This player has been playing this game for a very, very long time. And then there's a couple of newcomers here, and as well as a couple. Basel is another player I see on ladder a lot. Very strong player. So who do I think is going to take this group? Obviously, I think it's Tang Tang. Tang Tang's the heavy favorite. He did go out in group stage of Worlds last year, which was very surprising. So again, anything can happen. Just because I say this player is the number one player, just the way decks line up, you get a couple unlucky games. It is very possible that Tang Tang does not make it through. It's very possible that any of these players, myself included, does not make it out of groups. However, I do think Tang Tang, just on paper, is the most likely to take it. And then after that, here's a big argument between some of these names. Captain A, Kumashin, Basel, Gragan, actually played in OCC qualifiers today. They're up and coming. BK made it to the top 32 last year, I believe. In this case, I've got to hand it to Captain A, I think. Now, I'm not entirely sure how active they've been, which could play a pretty big role. But Captain A, in my experience, is a very, very skilled control player. And I think right now the meta is pretty obviously just everyone's going to bring Jagro. Most people are going to bring Frontline. There's going to be a lot of self-damage, maybe some Hines, maybe some CA. And I think Captain A, as a very solid control player, is in a prime position to sort of exploit the fact that some of these quote-unquote weaker players are just playing very relatively simple aggressive decks. And Captain A is a player who knows how to build and pilot a relatively anti-aggro control deck, so I think that's just going to position him well compared to some of these other players who might be able to play Jagro better than anyone else in the group, but you need to know more than just play Jagro well, since all of these games are going to be best of fives throughout the entire group stage. And I suppose you've figured this out by now, but all of the groups, it's round robin, you play everyone in the group, and then the 2 highest scored players advance. So from 16 groups, you take 2 from each of the 16 groups, and that results in the top 32. So now let's get on to Pool 2, or Pool Bravo. You have Birdo Burrito, the pre-qualified player, pre-qualified both through a season win as well as being in the top 4 from the previous year. Now, Birdo is a heavy favorite in this group. I don't particularly recognize anyone else in this group, to be completely honest. And that's not just because these names are in Asian scripts. I'm very familiar with quite a few of the Chinese players. I don't recognize any of these players, to be completely honest. So it's a bit difficult for me in this group in particular to say who I think is going to take it. Now, Susad, I believe I have seen in a couple OCC qualifiers. I could be entirely wrong about that, but again, I have nothing else to go on with these players. So I'm just going to say Susad, as the name I think I recognize from this group of players, is going to be advancing in Seed 2 out of this group with Birdo Burrito on top. Now, it's very easy to look at a group like this and say, oh, well, like, you know, Birdo has it easy. However, there's almost a fear with being in a group of entirely unknown players, because one, if Birdo does fail to make it out of this group, there's not really like an excuse. Like if you're in a group of death, it's like, well, I didn't make it out of groups, but like look at all these players in my groups. Birdo doesn't really have that. And two, you have no idea what these players play. You have no idea what their skills are, what decks that are their favorites that you might have with a more well-known player. So Birdo is really going into this blind. But that being said, I think Birdo should top this group without too much difficulty. And I did just to confirm, I did just reference the Kards leaderboards, and Susad did in fact get 11th in the most recent season. Some of the other players on this list have been in top 38 before, and for more seasons than Susad. However, Susad has the highest placement out of all of them, and the most recent placement out of all of them. So he has that going in. So again, I'm going to keep Susad, but I have referenced the cards ladder, so there's slightly more to go off of that. I did think I recognized his name. They got 2,800, which is quite impressive. All right, on to Group 3. This one is very interesting because the pre-qualified player for Group 3, or Group Charlie, is Bamboo. And Bamboo is pre-qualified from making it into the top 4 last year. However, Bamboo is not a tournament regular, and has not made any particular splashes since World Championship last year. Like, it's very interesting. So to contrast Head was also a relatively unknown player. Had played in 1 or 2 tournaments, I think, before Worlds, and then had got second in Worlds. And then since then, Head has just become a tournament regular for the year following. Bamboo has not had that same amount of... hasn't had that same show of force in tournaments, and I think a lot of that is just Bamboo does not play as much as Head. Bamboo does not play as much as probably any of the other players who are pre-qualified. So I don't think Bamboo is necessarily like a shoe-in, especially not just Seed 1 because they are the pre-qualified player in the same way that Birdo or Tang Tang are in their group. That being said, if you actually look at who else is in their group, it's a weird combination of recognizable names of players who have been on like sort of the outskirts of tournaments, or they've been in tournaments in the past, or they're very new up-and-comers but haven't done incredibly well in tournaments. So it's a very mixed bag of players who it's very difficult to evaluate their strength relative to each other. So if you look at the bottom of this list, you have Drogear. Drogear was in the top 4 of the first ever Cards World Championship. Drogear has been playing this game at a very high level since 2019. He was one of the favorites to win the 2019 World Championship and did get into the top 4. And he has made some tournament appearances since then in 2020, 2021, 2022. However, never really to that same level, but you can't just count out Drogear. So it's a big question of how well is Drogear going to adapt to this current meta? How much has Drogear been playing? Versus just how much of this is like legacy getting into top 128. Then you have players like Racing, and the LGY Ouch. I don't know how to say this person's name. These players are players who have been in the previous Worlds. These are players who have been in previous tournaments, but again, never making it too far into these tournaments. But they've been around more recently. They know the scene. And you have Dion, who, if people don't remember Dion has shown up. He's won an OCC. He's gotten second, I think, in an Open. He has a couple of like pretty high stats in tournaments, but he has not played a large number of tournaments, and he has not played anything recently. In fact, he didn't even pre-qualify because the tournament he won was last year. So Dion is a player where it's a big question of how much experience he has compared to a player like Moero, who I've never seen before. I don't think I've ever played against them on ladder. I could be mistaken about that. I've definitely never seen them in a tournament. However, they went 9-0, 9-0, 9-0 in qualifiers. So if you don't know, to get in through the Open Series qualifiers, you have to play 9 games on 6 separate dates, and it takes your best 3 scores. He was the only person in the second qualifier to win all 27 of their games, which is a crazy feat. Like, that is insane. However, how well does that translate? Is that just, getting lucky? I mean, it's hard to get lucky 27 times in a row, but... So clearly there's a baseline of skill here, but how much of this is luck, how much of this is just queuing at the right time, and it's a best of 5. You can't just be really, really good at Jagro. You need 2 other decks. So all of that being said, who do I think is going to make it out of this group? That is very, very hard to say. Also, I should point out that Dunkirk, the player below Moero, that's the translation of their name, or at least the name they gave. Dunkirk's just showed up to an OCC like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. Like, they got a top 8 once, and I've literally never seen them since then. But they're back, which is bizarre. So across all of these players, where it's difficult to evaluate all of them, in this group, I think Dion, I'm going to give Dion the Seed 2 position. Dion, obviously, arguably the strongest player here just based on total performance. Bamboo and Droger have both been in top 4s before, but Dion is the one who has shown the most consistency out of all of these players. However, I do think he's a little rusty. I've not seen him online much, and I do think he has the skills to make it into the top 128, but I don't think he's just going to crush this group. I think he needs to warm up a lot into this tournament, but I do think he's going to qualify in Seed 2, and I'm actually going to give this group to CNLGY Ouch, for a couple of reasons. One, I've seen them play. I think they're pretty decent. They're not like a regular ladder grinder necessarily, so you might not have seen them in top 38s, particularly, but they play the game, and very, very importantly, in the previous World Championship, the 2022 World Championship, LGY Ouch actually made it through into the top 32, and then in the top 32, it won the first round, so advanced to the top 16, essentially, or the top 24. And then there, he went to Game 4. He lost 3-1 to Bodo Burrito, who ended up making it into the top 4, obviously. And then he went down into the losers bracket and lost in Game 5 to Huey, one of the strongest players who have ever played this game. So despite getting only 17th in the previous Cards World Championship, which, is already kind of an insane achievement, for a player that most people are not too familiar with. If you look at actually who he lost to, he 3-0'd his first opponent, and then went to Game 4 against Birdo, Game 5 against Huey. This is a player who knows how to play. He's proven themselves where and when it counts, and I think that people in this group should keep an eye out for them. Now, obviously, I'm saying that I don't think Bamboo makes it. Absolutely no offense to Bamboo. I love him as a person. However, I know their favorite deck is Heinz, which is not in a great place in the meta, and I just simply don't think that they've been putting in as many hours into the game as of late as some of the other people in this group. But I think this group could be full of surprises. Moero, obviously, crazy performance. I don't think I've played against them, so maybe they're just an up-and-coming star, and this wasn't just like a fluke performance. But again, we'll have to see. So in Pool 4, or Pool Delta, the pre-qualified player is Head. Now, obviously, Head, very strong player, got second in the previous Cards World Championship, a tournament regular. I have no doubt that Head is going to be qualifying out of this group. However, the other players in this group, with the exception of John PX, the other players I'm not particularly familiar with. And some of them I'm fairly certain I've never played against, like Pain Gan and Danny's Direction. I think I would have recognized those names had I played against them, so I have no idea who these players are. I don't know how many hours they have, but obviously they got through the qualifiers, so they're here. And then you have John PX. Now, for people who might not recognize John PX is a competitive player from a while, who's been in the game for a while, and back in 2021, he was just crushing opens. He never did a strong performance or frequent performances in OCCs, but I think he won 2 or 3 opens, just absolutely crushed them. And he's been grinding a lot the last month. I have seen him on essentially constantly online cards, grinding. So I think Head is going to top this group. I think Head has the very relevant tournament experience up in this meta and the metas previous, and just against players, and I just think Head is very, very well situated to top this group, and I think John PX, this is his chance to maybe come back into the tournament scene, make a big name for himself again. I think John PX is going to be taking the number 2 seed in Pool Delta. Then we go on to Pool 5, Pool Echo. The pre-qualified player for Pool Echo is Leo. Now, Leo is an absolute beast of a player. He has shown up to 2 OCCs, and he won them both. And then he qualified to the OCC Ultimate and did not have as well of a performance there. In the previous World Championship, the 2022 World Championship, Leo went very far. I was the one who actually knocked him down in the winners quarterfinals. So Leo, very, very strong player. It does not need to be said. However, this is the first group that could be qualified a group of death. Up until now, we've been seeing like really a group with like one big player and then like a couple not sure players, and then I think it's Group C, where it was a big group of players who are all at a similar level, but that level is not too high. This is the first group where there's arguably 3 players who I would put in my top 32 if I just had to pick the top 32 players. Because if you look down in this group, you have TB273, who he grinds the top 38s. He's been playing top 38s for a very long time. And more recently, he has had some OCC performances. In fact, they actually did pretty well in the most recent OCC. And also, I think has gotten top 4 finishes in an Open last year. TB, very strong player. And not just very strong player, TB has a lot of connections in the community. So you can be sure that TB is going to be training with some of the best players in the English-speaking community, and he's going to be having very tried and true tested decks. And then the one just below TB is Artemisia, who is a tournament veteran. Artemisia has won several OCCs. They actually won the most recent OCC in September. And Artemisia, again, very well connected. From my understanding, Artemisia is good friends with Tang Tang, and is in that Chinese training group that is, you can be sure, is going to be practicing decks together, and similar to TB, is going to be bringing very, very strong decks. And then below that, you have Doggy34, who's a member of Team Ammo. So he is in one of my practice groups. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily sharing decks with him because Team Ammo has not been as active as of late. But I am sure that he still has connections in the community, so he can put up a fight. So all of this to be said, I really think it's going to come down to Leo, TB, and Artemisia. And out of these 3, if you look at purely tournament results, it's Leo and Artemisia. However, TB is such a wild card. I'm going to have TB qualifying in Seed 2 for this group. And this isn't just out of nowhere, and this isn't just because I like TB. This is because TB is the person who knocked Tang Tang out of the previous World Championship. TB was in a group with Tang Tang, and everyone just looked at that group and was like, okay, Tang Tang tops this group. TB probably doesn't make it just because there's like stronger players in the group. TB beat Tang Tang, which knocked Tang Tang out, and TB qualified for the top 32 in that Seed 2 position. He's a wild card who is capable of beating any player, and I firmly believe that. And that is why I have TB taking number 2 in this group, and I'm going to put Leo at number 1, because Leo shows up to play. He doesn't always win everything, although it seems like that sometimes, but I just think Leo is, from what I've seen from their gameplay, I think Leo is just a more stronger and more consistent player than Artemisia. I have seen flaws in Artemisia's gameplay at points, especially in sort of like key pressure situations. And when you're playing this many games, best of 5s, your back is going to be against the wall sometimes. You're going to have these important games. And I just think at the end of the day, Leo and TB are going to perform slightly better than Artemisia and be taking this group in that order. Which means I am putting Artemisia, who is easily, arguably a top 32 player in this World Championship, out in groups. So this is the first spicy one. Let's get to Pool Foxtrot, where at the top you have Bezio, just an absolute beast of a player. On the day of recording, which is Saturday, Bezio just qualified through the OCC play-ins for the 4th or the 3rd time, maybe the 4th time. And on top of that, obviously, Bezio won an OCC. That's why he's qualified here. Bezio is just an absolute beast of a player. I think he also came close to winning an Open, if I recall. Or maybe he won an Open and came close to winning an OCC. Yeah, I think he won an Open, now that I'm saying that. So Bezio, very strong player, and I think easily tops this group. And then the rest of the players in this group, I'm not going to lie, I do think that this group is another one of those groups where I don't really recognize any of the players. However, after having done a little bit of research, out of all of these players, Turpitz, who is the Chinese player between Camper and Sparky Oak, Turpitz did get 12th in the September season. So actually one position under Susad, another player who I didn't recognize. So Turpitz is the player I'm going to give the seed 2 to. Obviously, I'm giving the seed 1 to Bezio in this group. And this is not a ladder results does not necessarily mean tournament results, especially not in this. Again, it's a best of 5. So being able to play like 700 games of Jagro at a pretty high win rate is not the same as being able to perform well in a best of 5 across different decks. However, that is the only information I have to go off of for the other players in this group. So I'm going to be giving Bezio seed 1 and Turpitz seed 2. All right, on to pool golf. We have the player topping this pool is Vinny, who is pre-qualified from his amazing OCC victory with the Soviet Air, from what I remember. Vinny, obviously a tournament regular, ton of experience. Not the most results. However, in a tournament like Worlds, I think just going off of previous results in big tournaments is not the best mode of analyzing who you think is going to win. Now, obviously, if it's a known tournament player and someone you don't know, the known tournament player, but if it's between two known tournament players, I think it's important to look at what type of decks they bring, what their experience is, and beyond just their actual performances in these tournaments. Because Vinny is a creative player who is very strong at bringing counter lineups. He's very strong at reading the meta and bringing what's going to be very, very strong into that. So, and that's why Vinny is here. That's why Vinny qualified. Vinny is going to excel in a format like Worlds more so than other players, especially in the OCC where it's just best of 3s and people typically just bring like the best decks on ladder. I do think Vinny is going to be topping this group. Also, Vinny got 6th in the previous World Championship. Vinny was 1 best of 5 away from qualifying to top 4. So I think Vinny could very easily get there again, and the first step there is going to be winning this group. Now, the other players in this group is quite interesting. You have Vladimir, who I see on ladder so much. Like, actually, I swear I queue into this guy like 10 times a month. And then you have Starry Warren, who does not have a ton of tournament experience in cards. I know I've talked to Starry before, and I know Starry has a lot of CCG experience, not just in cards, but also in other games. So I don't think, I think that's going to translate well into a tournament. However, it is important to note that there's a big difference between casting tournaments and talking to high-level players and playing cards at a high level. So I think Starry's done very well to get this far in the top 128. However, I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to get beyond groups. I don't think it's impossible by any means, don't get me wrong. However, I think there is one player in this group who I would put slightly above, at least in how I think it's going to turn out in this group, which is Godwan, who is the player at the bottom of this list. That is, Godwan is the name that they gave to go by for the English speakers. This player, you probably don't recognize them, because as far as I'm aware, they have never played in a top 8. I don't think they've ever made it through qualifiers. In fact, I'm not even sure if they necessarily play in qualifiers. However, this player has made it into the top 38 on ladder so often. Like, just going back like 4 or 5 months, they were there every single month. I didn't go back further than that, but this is a name I recognize from just seeing them play on ladder. And this is a name I recognize just from like month after month making it into the top 38s. And this is going to be valuable experience, because in playing that much on ladder, ladder experience isn't necessarily the biggest thing ever. Like, obviously there's going to be some players who will largely not play ladder throughout the whole year, but will still show up and perform really, really well. However, ladder experience is going to be giving you experience playing against a lot of these sort of top players like Vinny, where even if you're not necessarily winning, it's just getting into the headspace of, oh, I'm like playing against Vinny. Because sometimes if you are a player who doesn't play that much, or you're a player that's newer to the competitive scene, you sort of like queue into somebody who you think is better than you, and you are going to play worse as a result. So I think Godwan just is going to have a bit of more of the experience, especially in aggressive meta decks. I think Godwan is just going to come in here with, you know, a very solid, aggressive, low to the ground lineup. And I think he's going to be able to take wins off of a lot of the other players in this group and get in with the seed 2 for Pool Golf. All right, now we have Pool Hotel. where we have Gorky topping the pool. Gorky, very a fan favorite, I think, for bringing just wacky decks. He loves these weird combo decks, these decks that focus on like your opponent not interacting with the game. He loves credit denial. He loves pin. He loves these weird OTKs, and also in his group is Baron von Glower, who is also known for these weird wacky decks, these weird OTK combos, and not remotely the same extent the uninteractivity. However, to make his weird OTK combos work, Baron is known to play a lot of pin, cards like Scorched Earth back when it was in the game. So these players are two players who, it's almost sad that they're in the same group, but in another way, it's going to be great. I really hope one of them records their games. Now, that being said, all of that being said about these two players' play styles, I don't think either of them are going to be bringing OTK to this tournament. I think they're both just going to be bringing more standard meta decks, and they are both more than capable of playing standard meta decks. Now, looking at who else is in this group, I don't recognize most of these players except for TurboCat, the player at the bottom. TurboCat has made it to a OCC top 6 before. They've certainly made it into top 38s frequently. Currently on ladder, they're top 6 as of speaking. So TurboCat is a ladder beast. That being said, I do think Gorky is going to top this deck, or top this group. I think Gorky is just a very innovative player, and everybody knows him for the innovations on like these weird combo decks. But what a lot of people don't know is that the number one meta Jagro deck that like sort of became solidified came from Gorky. So he's able to innovate on meta lists, he's able to innovate for aggro, and I think that's going to give him a slight edge over the other players in this group. And then in Siege 2, I think it's going to come down to Baron von Glower or TurboCat. I'm going to have to hand it to Baron. I think Baron has a very strong practice group, and I think Baron is going to just have that little bit of edge and experience in these types of tournaments at playing against a large number of players, especially players who might be bringing weirder lineups or players who are going to be less experienced at the game. Baron is just an absolute beast in the qualifiers. Now, I think he's only won one OCC qualifier. However, he goes deep in most qualifiers. So I think Baron is going to have that edge over TurboCat. I don't think TurboCat has played a lot of qualifiers. And just based on TurboCat's play in the top 6 that they qualified for, I thought it looked a little shaky. And now that very easily could just be because it's a tournament. However, this is also a big high-stakes tournament, arguably much more high-stakes than an OCC Clash. So that being said, I think Gorky and Baron are going to both make it out of this group, which is, again, quite very, very funny that both of these players ended up in the same group together. All right, so now we're halfway through the groups. We have Group 9, Pool India, where at the top of the group we have Cappuccino, who is just an absolute beast of a player. I would put Cappuccino easily in my top 10 Cards players of all time. I think Cappuccino is very, very good, and they are pre-qualified for a reason. That being said, Cappuccino has not been as active this year as last year or the year before. However, I still think Cappuccino is very, very, very strong. So I think Cappuccino is going to be taking this group. Then elsewhere in this group, we have PyTorch, who got second in an OCC not too long ago. I believe they made it through qualifiers to do so. That being said, I don't have much confidence in PyTorch's play, at least from then. That was a long time ago, so obviously things could change. The meta has changed a lot for sure. However, I'm not sure how much of those skills are going to translate. Obviously, all of these players have made it into the top 128 through the qualifiers. So all of these players have a degree of skill. I'm not trying to say any of these players are bad, but to make it out into the top 32 does require a little bit more. And I'm just not sure that some of these other players really have that. Now, of course, I must mention that the second player on this list is Razlan, who I believe is the host or creator of the Cards Chinese Discord, where they have it is a huge Cards Discord for Chinese players, and they also host a lot of they host the Chinese tournaments there. So Razlan, very awesome member of the Cards community. However, I would not say that they are necessarily like a incredibly strong competitive player. So I think I would have to give the seed 2 position for Pool 9 to Mayumi at the bottom, because Mayumi is another one of these players who I don't believe we have seen in a top 8 of any OCCs. I don't believe that we've seen in any top 16 of any Opens. However, is a player who very consistently gets like 2,700, 2,750 on ladder, gets into these qualifiers, and then I'm not actually sure if Mayumi has played a lot of qualifiers, because a lot of players get into the qualifiers, and then especially if they're living somewhere in Asia, they don't play because of just the way time zones work and the time lines up. However, Mayumi has definitely shown that they are able to perform at a very high level on ladder very consistently, and that's something that I don't think is really true for anyone else in this group, other than obviously Cappuccino, who I still think is just going to take this group because I evaluate Cappuccino very highly as a player. So I think this group is going to be Cappuccino and Mayumi making it out. Now we have Pool Juliet, where the pre-qualified player for this pool is Azzy or Princess Azzy, whatever you prefer. This is a player in the Tang Tang's group of friends, so they're going to be part of that group of, you know, practicing decks, sharing lineups, etc. I know they absolutely love Frontline, and Frontline's coming back in the meta at the perfect time for them, and they've shown pretty strong performances both in tournaments and on ladder. So I don't think it is too much of a reach to say that I think Princess is going to be winning this group. Now, who's going to be taking the second position in this group? Now, I recognize a couple of the names in this group. However, I don't recognize them for tournament play. I recognize them for their contributions and activity elsewhere in the community. So, who do I think is going to be taking this group? I'm actually going to give the Seed 2 position to Hayes. Hayes is definitely not a player that you're going to recognize from any tournaments. You might recognize Hayes as the player who he makes the sort of stat breakdown of decks, nations in decks that are submitted to various tournaments. He's a spreadsheets guy, he's a stats guy, and he has been following the Cards competitive scene for a very, very long time, and he is in constant communication with various players who play very regularly in tournaments. So that does not necessarily directly translate to like skill. Like, being surrounded by people who are very good at something doesn't necessarily mean you are going to be good at it. However, I think if Hayes puts in the time and the energy into this tournament, I think Hayes could very easily get a good read on what people are going to be bringing, get a good idea of what decks are good into that, and then honestly, if you have those two steps, you have a much larger margin of error in how you pilot the decks if you already have the correct decks picked into what your opponents are playing. That's like half the battle in tournaments. So I think Hayes is going to be taking this number 2 position, even though it does not have a lot of ladder or tournament experience. So I'm very interested to see how this group shakes out. So then let's get on to Pool Kilo, where at the top you have Xyloser taking the group, or not taking the group, sorry. At the top you have Xyloser pre-qualifying for the group, and then you have a series of players who you may or may not recognize. I think the most memorable name in this list is Tree Pipit, who, if you've never played against, honestly, I would recommend it. If you play against Tree Pipit, maybe take out, maybe start recording the game, because it's always going to be something wacky. He's always playing the most wild decks, and it's not just wild decks that are bad. You see a lot of wild decks that are bad. Tree Pipit is very good at making just absolutely wild decks and making you think, wait, there's no way that's actually, like, playable, right? Right? So I don't know if he's going to be bringing meta stuff or if he's going to be doing his more traditional sort of wacky out there decks. However, I think that he's going to be able to more than adequately pilot either of those. Now, other names in this group I recognize: 943265831. I recognize PDC 2018. However, I don't think either of them are necessarily super high performers. I think this one is a pretty obvious Xyloser and Tree Pipit as the favorites to make it through this group. However, I'm going to go out on a bit of a wild take, and I think Tree Pipit's taking the group over Xyloser. Now, this might seem like a bit of a crazy play, or a crazy call, especially if you follow the Cards competitive community, because Xyloser definitely has far more achievements within the competitive scene than Treepipit has. That being said, I am not a huge fan of how Xylusers play, from what I've seen in previous tournaments, and I think over a lot of best of fives, I think Treepipit may be able to outperform him, as well as I think Treepipit is going to be more capable of sort of getting a more firm grip on the meta than just bringing what is meta and playing a bunch of mirrors over and over. So I still think Xyluser is an amazing player, and I still think Xyluser is going to get it out of this group. However, I'm going to put Treepipit on top. So now we get to Group 12, which is my group, and once again, we are in a position where there's a couple names here, a couple more names you might recognize, all in one group. Now, by no means do I think this is the group of death. However, I think this is easily like one of the top 4 strongest groups. So you have myself. Obviously, I rate myself very well as a player. I've won the last 2 world championships. However, also in this group, you have Wild Eyes, who is my teammate, has also performed decently well in tournaments in the past, not so much recently, but again is a player who you can count on making top 38 if they're going to try for it. I think Wild Eyes is a very strong player. Again, not sure how much he has been active recently. However, I know he has been training a lot since he qualified for this tournament. So he might not have a ton of experience in the previous months leading up to this tournament. However, I think he is making up for lost time in the next couple of weeks. So that's definitely something to scary. And then also in this group, you have OX Corn Guy. The OH stands for Ohio, so it's Ohio Corn Guy, but it's OX Corn Guy. Now, this is a player I absolutely did not want in my group. He was in my group last year. I hated it. I did beat him 2-1, but I very, very nearly did not qualify out of groups. Corn Guy he doesn't have the best ladder performances. I don't think he's a player who puts a ton of time in on ladder. He has much better open performances. However, he is, again, one of just these wild card players who sometimes will just, like, play a perfect set. Like, they will just play a set flawlessly, and they'll bring, like, a weird out there deck that just draws, like, perfectly the way it was intended to, and just, there's nothing you can do. You cannot beat him. And then other times, he might just lose to a player you would expect him to beat. So it's a bit of a wild card in that situation. I absolutely do not want to be playing against him in this tournament. I do not want to be playing against him in groups. I don't want to be playing against him in the knockout stages. Keep this man away from me. Unfortunately, he is in my group, and I think he's a very strong contender. And then at the bottom of this group, or nearing the bottom of this group, below Corn Guy, you have Freddy, who is not a tournament regular. However, Freddy is a player who has made it into several top 38s, has played in several qualifiers, and won in one of the qualifiers. He then went on into the OCC. He beat me in the OCC and went on, and I think he got second. I think he beat me in the semifinals and went on and lost in the finals, but still got second. So Freddy is a player who can take big names. Freddy is a player with a lot of experience, and Freddy is a player who can do well. However, that was before rotation, if my memory serves, and I've not seen him nearly as much since rotation. Now, obviously, again, he's here in this tournament. He qualified for the top 128, so that says something. Who do I think is going to take this group? I actually think my money's on Corn Guy to take this group. This guy is insane. And, like, this guy just crushes these types of round-robin tournaments. There's just some sort of magic to him in these types of tournaments. He just crushes the open qualifiers as well, like the Swiss rounds. I think he's going to crush this tournament, or at least this group stage, and I think he's going to take it, and then I think I'm going to get seed 2. However, I think Wild Eyes is, again, a strong contender for this. Freddy, I don't know how much he's been training, but if he puts in a ton of time, I think he also could be a contender in this group. This group is very, very strong. However, I do think Corn Guy, and then myself, J King, coming out of Group Lima. Then we have Pool Mike, with No15 being the pre-qualified player. No15, I think, is a player who does not need a lot of introduction. No15 is synonymous with OCCs, just absolutely crushes them. And more recently, up until they were cancelled, he started to perform better and better in opens, and No1 made it into the top 32 of the previous World Championship, which isn't something that's necessarily crazy like you would expect him to, but the point is more of like, he is a player who is, if nothing else, very, very consistent. So I think he's a player you can count on to make it through groups, not in the same way other people can be a bit more inconsistent in that way. No one is just the center of consistency in cards. The man is just an absolute beast. Now, who else is in his group? Now, there's a couple names I recognize from ladder. Shivas is a player who has been grinding expansion Jagro for the last, 3 years, I swear. This person was just playing expansion Jagro, high up on the ladder, back when, Feigned Retreat was around. So this is Shiva's meta. That being said, I've not seen Shivas in tournaments, as far as I'm aware. I think they might have been made a top 16 open once. I'm not positive about that. And then lower down on this list, you have a couple other top 38 players like CN Symbol. But then you have Dear Admiral, who is not a tournament regular by any means. However, what makes me pick Dear Admiral to qualify out of Seed 2, out of this group, is the fact that I believe it was May 2023. I could be completely wrong about that. Let me go check that now. Okay, I was a bit way off. February 2023. Dear Admiral just climbed up to 3,000 elo 10 days into the month, which is insane. That is not just oh, they grinded a bunch of games. That is actually incredibly impressive and incredibly difficult to do. And then they just didn't play for the rest of the month. I ended up passing them. They got second on ladder, which is why they weren't pre-qualified. And then they didn't show up to the top 6. I think they just had a scheduling conflict or something, and they just didn't show up. And that is a man that scares me. Somebody who can just absolutely annihilate ladder, make it into the top 6 for the first time in their career, and then just not show up to the tournament and not even care. And I haven't seen him. He did not make any top 6s after that point. I believe they probably have been playing on ladder. I think I've run into them on ladder a few times since that point, and obviously they made it into the top 128. But I think Dear Admiral is a player with a lot of potential that has gone unproven so far. So I really want to see Dear Admiral make it out of this group, go far in this tournament, and just see how far he can go with that just the crazy skills it takes to get 3K barely a week and a half into the season. Now we have Group 14, Pool November. The pre-qualified player for this group is Tiger. This is the last pre-qualified player. Groups 15 and 16 do not have pre-qualified players and are entirely players that made it through the in-game qualifiers. Now, in this group, you have Tiger, you have TRD. They've been around for a long time. They played for Germany in the original Spoozes Nations Cup back in 2020. And then you have, honestly, this is kind of the group of death, in my opinion. Then you have Citrus, who, Citrus might not be a player you recognize. They've certainly made a lot of top 38s. However, where I recognize Citrus from is Citrus got 8th in the 2022 World Championship. And I believe they also got top 16 in the 2021 World Championship. I would need to double check that. However, Citrus is just a player who shows up and does really well at World Championships. And beyond that, they play on ladder. So this might not be a player who has the time or desire to grind out 300 games to make it into an OCC. But this is clearly a player who has the skills necessary to perform well in a tournament when in that position, and this is Citrus in that position. However, also in this group, you have SM Tesm, or Maudi on Discord. Now, on top of just making a lot of memes, Maudi is another player who regularly makes it into top 38, regularly plays in qualifiers, and has made it through the qualifiers once relatively recently. And this is a player who, again, is going to have a lot of connections in the community, and might not necessarily have the greatest track record, but this is going to be a player who could easily qualify out of this group. And then below him is List, who I have not seen List in a while, personally. However, List is a tournament player going back several years, and the fact that they were in top 128, again, shows that they have shown up, they have played, and if they played to get into top 128, I'm going to assume that they are going to be putting in more hours to train. So this is 4 players, who I could very easily see taking this group. I do think Tiger is going to top this group. Tiger is a fairly consistent player, and by far is the one with the most regular tournament experience in this meta. So I think seeing anything other than Tiger taking this group is insane. However, between Terror D, Citrus, SM Tesm, and List, to take the next position in this group, that is very, very hard. I'm gonna have to give it to Citrus, though. Making it to top 32 is not an easy task. It is not just something somebody lucks their way into. And he has done that 2 years in a row. Now, he has not made it to the top 4, so he's not a name everybody knows. But again, got 8th. Like, if you had won 2 more best of 5s, everybody would know who Citrus is, and everyone would be saying, yes, Citrus, obviously Citrus gets into position 2. However, they got 8th, so most people don't know them. However, I think Citrus is definitely somebody to be scared of, especially in this group. However, again, anything could happen in this group. Like, Tiger couldn't qualify. Maybe it's like Asm Bliss. Maybe it's Taro D, Kachua. Who knows? Anything can happen in these groups, but I do think Tiger and Citrus are my picks to make it out of Pool November. Now we have Group 15, the first group with no pre-qualified players. That being said, that does not necessarily mean that there is no known players. Now, obviously, the first name that pops out on this list is Introdiction. Introdiction is a content creator. If you don't know Introdiction, search up Introdiction Cards on YouTube, subscribe to them. They make really good content, better content than I do, to be completely honest. However, I don't know Introdiction as a tournament player. Obviously, they're not bad, but are they going to be able to compete with some of the other names in this group? Because one step below Introdiction is Killswitch, and Killswitch is much closer to what you would call a tournament regular. Killswitch is a beast. Is not quite a, like, shoo-in for top 6. However, Killswitch has made numerous top 6s, and is always, like, a wild card for that top 6 position, and if they're not making top 6, you better believe they're showing up to qualifiers. And I'm not sure if Killswitch has made it through qualifiers or not. I just know they've been in a lot of OCCs, because they've made top 6 a lot. However, Killswitch has a ton of tournament experience under his belt, and has beat me on a number of occasions in tournaments, and that's not just saying, like, oh, he beat me, so he's good. I've been beating my players, and it's like, oh, wow, I got, like, really, really unlucky. Or, like, oh, wow, this player got super, super unlucky and didn't deserve it. Killswitch beats me. He gets lucky, and he deserves it. So I think Killswitch is a very strong contender to make it out of this group. Also, I've been practicing with Killswitch a lot for this tournament. He and I have been sharing decks, so it's decks I believe in. It's decks that I'm going to bring. So, and obviously I'm bringing what I think is the best lineup, and if Killswitch is bringing almost the exact same thing, I think Killswitch is going to be very well prepared deck-wise for this tournament, so I'm going to be having Killswitch top this group. Now, the other players in this group are certainly no slouches themselves. You do have Nanami, who's the second player in this group. They made a top 6 this year. They brought really bizarre decks. If you remember, they're the one who had the Spirit of Rome, I believe. They really like Italy. If they bring bizarre decks again, I do not think they're going to make it, but obviously they made it into top 6 somehow, so they clearly have skills to play meta decks well. You have Stanislav, who's just a ladder beast. I queue into this guy all the time. Very strong player. And then at the bottom, you have Chaos, who is a player who's actually started to show up in these top 8s more recently. So, not top 8s, sorry, top 38s. I'm just checking September 34th. They actually got 8th on ladder 29-22 in August. Chaos, I think, is a player on the brink of becoming a much more well-known name. And even though he does not have that sort of peak that Nanami has, I think Chaos has the much more consistent record. And I think that's going to go a long way for a big round-robin best-of-5s like this. So I think Killswitch is going to take Pool Oscar, and Chaos is going to get in the Siege 2. Last but not least, we have Pool Papa, Pool 16. Now, looking at the players in this pool, there's a couple players in here who I have no idea who they are. I've never seen them before on ladder. So that could be either new players or, like, you know, draft players who logged off a draft long enough to just crush qualifiers. We've seen that before. That's sort of what CCMS did back in the day. But then you have players who are either new to the newer to the top 38 scene, like Sean, who played at OCC qualifiers again today. So clearly has a pretty high degree of familiarity and strength on meta decks. And then you have the more well-known names at the bottom. You have Thanatron, who has shown up. I don't believe he's ever made a top 8. However, I believe he's played in qualifiers. Again, I don't think Thanatron's a player who's going to be playing like 400 games to get into quals. But Thanatron has absolutely done well in opens, back when the opens were more of a thing. Since those are tournaments where you just sort of show up, you bring your decks, and you play on the day off. You don't need these hundreds and hundreds of games. And the fact that Thanatron has shown up and made it into the top 16 before like that goes a long way. and is much more comparable, I think, to the round robin than, say, ladder, where you play in the same deck over and over and over. Thanatron is used to sort of switching around decks and seeing a much wider range of decks, playing against a much wider range of players. The other big name in this group, I think, is Apara. Again, not like a super big tournament name, Apara. However, Apara is definitely a player who I have seen on ladder before. I've seen pretty high in ladder before, and I want to say, has done well in the Opens, back when the Opens were around. Now, I'm not seeing Apara in the last couple of months in the top 38. However, I'm just going to trust my gut on this one. I think Apara is kind of a cracked player, just based on my memory of queuing into them. I don't know why, but when I see that name, I kind of get nervous. So I'm going to actually have Thanatron topping the group with Apara to follow. I think a lot of the other names here I'm just not familiar with, so I have no idea how to gauge their experience. Or it's names that I've seen around, but I think they're still very, very new. Apara and Thanatron have both been playing this game for a very long time, and I think that's going to go far in judging weird decks, judging weird situations that come up, and also like handling your nerves in a tournament, handling your nerves and playing a lot of cards in one day. I just think that experience is going to go a fairly long way for Thanatron and Apara in this pool 16. So now that means we have my fantasy bracket 32 players. So let's put them into the bracket and see how that filters down from 32 to 1. All right, so I've created my fantasy top 32 bracket based on my aforementioned seedings, and this is just based on how they've been seeded in the last two World Championships. So that is why you have Tang Tang versus Apara, Bordo Burrito versus Chaos right at the top. So now we're just going to go through the rest of the bracket fairly quickly, depending on the thing, is saying who I think is going to win. So Tang Tang versus Apara. I think this is not a crazy call, but I think Tang Tang is going to win against Apara. And again, at this stage, it's still best of fives, but now you bring 4 decks and there's a ban. So in the previous stage, it's bring 3 decks, best of 5, you play all of them. Now it's bring 4 decks, best of 5, there's a ban. Tang Tang versus Apara, I think Apara takes it. Bordo Burrito versus Chaos, I think Bordo takes it. So now you have Bordo Burrito versus Tang Tang in round 2, which is insane, but we'll get there. We have LGY Ouch versus Citrus. This is a tough one. These are 2 players who I don't know a ton about, but I also think each one could easily beat the other. I'm not sure how well, how much each has been playing recently. That being said, I think I have seen LGY Ouch on ladder more recently. I think I've seen them higher recently. Could be entirely wrong about this, but I am going to give it to LGY Ouch. And then we have Head versus their Admiral, which it's if that does happen, it's kind of a tough first matchup for their Admiral, but I think Head is going to take that. And then let's just do this while we're here. Tang Tang versus Bordo Burrito. This is the first real hard decision of this fantasy bracket. I'm going to give it to... This is tough, because Tang Tang has more recent success in the competitive scene. However, Bordo has much more success in the World Championship, because again, Bordo got 3rd last year versus Tang Tang going out in groups. Now, obviously, that's one tournament. I don't think it's fair to judge everything based off of that one tournament. But I know the drive that Bordo has, both to redeem himself in his eyes. I mean, like, 3rd's insane, but I know he wanted to win. And 2, last year we did not get to go to Iceland, so I'm sure Bordo would love to go to Iceland. So I think there might just be more of a drive for Bordo. But again, on paper, I think the stats favor Tang Tang. So, all that being said, I think I would give it to Bordo, but again, I think this is a bit of a coin toss. I think Tang Tang performs better in smaller set sizes. I think Tang Tang performs really, really well in best of 3s, because I think he performs I think he performs ludicrously well on a smaller number of decks. I don't think his deck building is particularly great, and I don't think his ability to play control is as good as his ability to play aggro and tempo. That is not to say that it is bad. Like, it's still better than like 90% of the Cards community. However, Birdo is not 90% of the Cards community. So I think in a best of 5, I think I'm going to have to give this to Birdo over Tang Tang. And again, I swear it's not just because he's my friend. Then at the bottom, we have LGY Ouch versus Head. This is a much more, this one's much easier to decide. We are just going to be giving this one to Head, which means we are going to be getting the round 3 Birdo versus Head rematch, which is going to be a ton of fun. And now, between Birdo and Head, I think I give this one to Birdo. This is a matchup that happened, in case you did not watch the World Championship of 2022. Birdo played Head in the first round of the top 4, and he beat Head pretty resoundingly. It was a 3-0. And then Birdo dropped down into the loser's bracket. Head advanced forward in the loser's bracket. They met in the third place match, or not third place match because it's double elimination, but they met in the loser's final, meaning the loser gets third, the winner goes back into the finals to play for first. And in this rematch, Birdo went up 2-0, and again, he 3-0'd him the first time, and then he lost 3 consecutive games on self-damage, which is Birdo's like signature favorite deck, and I'm sure Birdo will want revenge after that, and again, I do think Birdo is just going to have a much larger drive to perform well in this tournament than other players. And again, this is a matchup that could go either way. I think Head has improved drastically as a player since 2022, whereas Birdo has been focusing more on casting than playing in that time. So I think their skill level in 2022, I think, was much bigger. I think it has narrowed a lot. However, I just got to give it to Birdo here. Then let's go down. Here, we have myself versus Leo. This one, again, I did beat Leo in the 2022 World Championship. I think Leo is a very, very strong player who you do not want to be seeing this early. I really hope I don't get Leo in round 1. However, I think I just have more experience than Leo, and the history of the matchup definitely leans my way. Then we have Bezio versus Xyloser. I think this is a pretty easy one to give to Bezio. I just think Bezio performs at a higher level than Xyloser, and I think Bezio is going to enjoy the best of 5 with a ban format more than Xyloser. Then we go down to Vinny versus Hayes. I think I have to give this one to Vinny. Vinny just has a ton of experience, and again, I think Vinny is going to have something to prove maybe in this tournament. Not to prove, but I think Vinny is just going to excel really well in the World Championship format. Then we have Gorkyu versus Mayumi. I'm again just going to give this one to Gorkyu. Gorkyu, very, very good on the meta decks. So then that brings me to myself versus Bezio, which, if this does happen, that'd be really funny because I play Bezio in the first round of the next OCC Clash, which is coming up, like, I guess the following week after the top 32. So it would be funny if we got this matchup twice. We have gotten this matchup twice before in OCC, and both times I defeated Bezio, and I don't think it would be different here in a best of 5. I think I just have more experience than Bezio in best of 5s, so I think I would take it. Vinny versus Gorkyu. I think Gorkyu is good. I think Vinny is going to perform better in this tournament. I think Gorkyu does not have as much experience on a wider range of meta decks as Vinny. And I also think Vinny might bring something weird to this tournament that Gorkyu might be less prepared to play against. So I'm going to give it to Vinny. And then myself versus Vinny. Again, just going based on history. I have a pretty positive track record against Vinny. I beat him in the World Championship last year in the top 6. To qualify for the top 4, so I think I would take it. However, this is not, again, not an easy match. This is not a match I want to have in the second round, or third round, actually. None of these are really matches I want to have. If this happens, this is very reminiscent of last year, where I had CCMS into No and 5, into Leo, into Birdo Burrito, into Vinny. Like, that was my tournament run. That was brutal. And it's looking pretty brutal again. But I think I would take it over Vinny in a close one. And then we would move on to Birdo versus myself. However, we will leave that for later once we have all of the semifinalists. Down here, we have Cappuccino versus Baron Von Glower. I love Baron, but I think Cappuccino is just an absolute beast at cards tournaments. Princess versus Godwan. Again, not very familiar with Godwan. much more familiar with Princess. I think I give this one to Princess. Tree Pipit versus Turpitz. This is one is a bit of a bizarre one because I don't think anybody would have Tree Pipit or Turpitz in like their like, oh yeah, definitely like top 32 picks. That being said, I do think I give it to Tree Pipit. I'm just more familiar with him as a player, and therefore it's easier for me to think of ways he wins. Corn Guy versus TB273. This is a really funny one. They are teammates. Both great guys. I think I would have to give it to TB. I think Corn Guys, I mentioned this before, I think Corn Guy is a beast in these round robin formats, in these Swiss round formats. I think in just a closed bracket, TB is going to have much more experience in this, played through the OCC qualifiers, played at OCC top 8s. As well as I think TB is probably a slightly more consistent player. Last year, Corn Guy famously brought Patton and Campaign Trail in his frontline deck because he thought it would be fun at the cost of removing a Red Devils, or maybe both Red Devils, I forget. But like his explanation was just like, well, I never draw the card anyway, so why would I want it in my deck? Which, fair enough. I think TB is just going to take it a little bit more seriously. So that is why I have TB taking it over Corn Guy. Then we have Cappuccino versus Princess. I think Cappuccino is the stronger player. Can get that through right away. TB versus Tree Pipit. Again, I just think TB is the stronger player. Then we have Cappuccino versus TB. I think TB is good. I think Cappuccino is better. So we are going to move on to the final 8 players. At the bottom of the bracket here, we have No 5 versus John PX. I want to watch that game. But I also think that No 5 would take it. Tiger versus Dion. Again, Dion has not been playing as much as Tiger recently, as well as Tiger just has slightly more consistent tournament records. Killswitch versus Susad. Again, I'm much more familiar with Killswitch and his records, which is very, very strong. And then at the bottom here, we have Thanatron versus Captain A. This is a bizarre one because, again, very similar to the last one of, I think, Tree Pipit versus Turpitz. Thanatron versus Captain A is a very bizarre matchup that I don't think a lot of people would put in their typical fantasy top 32s, but that's just how things have worked out. And here I do think Thanatron would take it because I don't think... I mentioned Captain A's strength being just crushing aggro. After the decks have been published, I think that both gives Thanatron an opportunity to not bring, like, quadruple aggro if he sees Captain A brought, like, super anti-aggro, as well as though Thanatron is much more comfortable on control decks than probably a lot of players in Captain A's group, so I think it's probably going to be a bit more of a diverse lineup, which means Captain A could struggle there. So we're going to be giving it to Thanatron. No 5 versus Tiger. I think No 5 is just the stronger player, so we're going to give it to him. Killswitch versus Thanatron. I think Killswitch is the stronger player, so we're going to be giving it to him. Then we get on to No 5 versus Killswitch, and again, this is a really, really hard one, because I've been practicing a lot with Killswitch, which both means I've been seeing how well he's been performing right now, which is very well as I've been working with decks with him, so I think he's going to have really, really good decks. That being said, I don't know if he's going to be able to overcome the no-one factor, which is the fact that no one is just going to bring 4 decks of whatever the hell he wants, and he's going to high roll you on all of them. If it's Ramp, he's going to have War Machine on 2 into, like, 5th Rangers on 3. If it's Heinz, he's going to have, like, a Greif on 4 to kill you with Blitzkrieg. No one is a very versatile player, and he's become much more versatile this year. Before, he could, like, only play aggro decks. He's been focusing a lot on these more control decks in the last year. He's become much more versatile, and he has not stopped high rolling on whatever he plays. So clearly there is some method to this madness. And while I think this is a very close match, I think I would give it to no one in 5 games. Which means my top 4 on the winner side is myself versus Birdo Burrito and Cappuccino versus No 5. Now, this is not too surprising. I would probably put all 4 of these 8... I would put all 4 of these players in my top 10 players of cards. There's some big names that have dropped down into the losers bracket, though, and we are going to take a look at that first. First, we deal with the people in losers round 1. So this is people that are going to be going out of the tournament in position 25th. These are going to be the 8 players who get knocked out of top 32 first. So Apollo versus Chaos. Chaos has more recent tournament results. Citrus versus Dare Admiral. This is hard because I don't want to put either of these players out of the tournament in the first round of top 32. I think both of these players could easily push further. Well, looking through the ladder, though, I did see Dare Admiral, on top of just, like, his crazy month in February, he also has been, like, making top 38s. He has been keeping up on the ladder. So I do think I would give it to Dare Admiral for that reason. Leo versus Siloser. I think Leo is the stronger player. And it would just be crazy to me to put Leo out of the tournament at the beginning. Hayes versus Mayumi. That is hard. I don't know a lot about either of these two players' playstyles, what decks they do, how well they perform on those decks. Mayumi does just have the ladder results that Hayes lacks, so I think it's a safe bet to give it to them. Although, spoiler alert, the Widow plays Princess, and I think Princess is going to beat whoever. Baron Von Glower versus Godwan. I think Baron takes this. Tropitz versus Corn Guy. Got to give it to Corn Guy. And John PX versus Dion. Again, this is a crazy matchup that I would love to see. John PX versus Dion. I think John PX, I got to give it to the man. John PX has been grinding hard recently. Like, this guy is easily, like every time I open cards, I see John PX's online cards. And that is just something that I can't say about Dion. Dion has had more, quote-unquote, more recently, but, like, more recently as in, like, a year ago instead of 2 years ago, so I don't think the recency of either of their tournament results is super relevant. So just going off of very, very recent, John PX, I think, is going to take that one. And then Captain A versus Susad. I think Captain A is going to perform well here. Again, based on his very, like, I think he's able to counter aggro in a very strong way that a lot of players fail to do. So, now losers round 2, Thanatron versus Chaos. I think Chaos is going to take this one. I think it's going to be tough to call. However, Chaos does have more ladder experience, and I think that is going to lend well to being down in this losers bracket. I think it is just going to be, like, Chaos is going to know the feeling of, like, being 50 points down with, like, 6 hours left of the season, and that's when you just, like, put on, like, whatever your epic music album is, and then you just grind. And I think that grind is going to, dropping into the losers bracket this early, grinding is going to be what it's going to take to keep on advancing in this tournament, and that's why I think Chaos is favored. Tiger versus Dare Admiral. I think Tiger is just the more consistent player with the better results. Tweepafit versus Leo. Again, I think Leo just has the better results over Tweepafit. Princess versus Mayumi, we already know where this one's going. So we're starting to thin out into these much more tournament regulars. Obviously, Chaos is not a super big tournament regular here, but we are starting to thin down. The rematch of Gorkyu versus Baron. I did not see this one coming. That is hard to call. I think Gorkyu, I have to give it to Gorkyu. I think Gorkyu has shown more consistent strength on a wider range of meta decks than Baron has. Although, again, I really hope that if this happens, they both bring in at least one OTK deck and somebody records it, because that would be a crazy match. Besio versus Corn Guy. I think that's actually going to be a tough fight. I think both of these players have shown pretty strong competency with control. So I think this could turn into a very long slugfest, but I have Besio taking it. LGY Ouch versus John PX. Again, I think John PX is on that grind, so he's going to be taking it. And then Tang Tang versus Captain A. I'm just giving it to Tang Tang. I don't feel the need to further elaborate that. Now we have losers round 3, Chaos versus Tiger. Tiger takes it. Leo versus Princess. This is where we start to run into a lot more tough decisions every single round, because we're starting to get down to the point where it's like these are just like this tournament regulars who don't necessarily always play in the same tournaments, but they are cracked players. Leo versus Princess, though. Princess has played more tournaments. However, from just exclusively the tournaments I have seen, I think Leo is a stronger player. So I have him taking it. Gorkyu versus Bezio. Again, I think these players are very similar in strength. However, I'm going to have Bezio taking it over Gorkyu. I think Bezio just has more experience, especially playing in quals so much that it gives you the mental fortitude to make it through losers bracket. Since in quals, like, if you've played in a quals, you've played in a losers bracket, let's be honest. And then down here we have John PX versus Tang Tang. I think John PX has been grinding a lot, but I don't think that is going to be a match for playing against Tang Tang this early in a tournament. Now we have losers round 4, Vinny versus Tiger. Again, I think these players are very evenly matched, and I feel like they played in the finals of a tournament not too long ago. I recall Vinny versus Tiger being a matchup, and I think Vinny took it then, and I think I'm going to give it to Vinny now. Head versus Leo. Again, this is a brutal one to call. I think Head has shown more consistency, though. Killswitch versus Bezio. These are not getting any easier, and I feel like I'm making a lot of enemies here. I feel like people are going to watch this, and I'm like, what do you mean I lose to, this player? Again, please, this is not to piss off anybody, but Killswitch versus Bezio, both very strong players. I'm going to give it to Killswitch, though, just because I know what Killswitch is probably going to be bringing, and I think it's going to be performing really, really well, whereas I expect Bezio to bring the more traditional, just like straight up meta list with a couple control decks maybe sprinkled in on top. Then we have TB273 versus Tang Tang, which, if I would have Tang Tang like entering top 4 through losers bracket versus like almost anybody. However, TB273 has beat Tang Tang in tournaments not once, not just in the 2022 World Championship where he knocked Tang Tang out very early in the tournament, but he also knocked Tang Tang out of, like, I think he beat Tang Tang in the semifinals of an OCC not too long ago. He did get destroyed by Tang Tang in the most recent matchup. However, I think this deep in the losers bracket, best of 5, I think anything can happen, and if anybody is going to knock out Tang Tang, I think it has to be TB for the story, so I'm going to have TB taking it over Tang Tang, despite all of the stats. And now we have our final 8. So, on the winner's side of the bracket, we have Birdo Burrito versus J King 7, Cappuccino versus No One 5, and then in the loser's bracket, we have Vinny versus Head, Killswitch versus TB273. This is a crazy topic. I'm not gonna lie. So, starting with the losers round 5, Vinny versus Head. This could go anywhere. This is like actually... Oh, this is a tough one to call. This is a very, very tough one to call. Because both of these players, like, Head has the more practical experience in recent tournaments, and had made it into the top 4 last year. However, there's just something about Vinny where I think he's just going to be performing really well in this tournament. Now, having said that, he's probably like on a bomb out of groups 0-6 or something. However, I really think that Vinny is just going to be doing really, really well in this tournament, whereas I think Head is going to be bringing the normal standard lineup, as is his style, to just bring consistency. And I think Vinny is very good at targeting what everybody is bringing. So, with that being said, I do think Vinny is going to be taking this and knocking Head out of the tournament in 7th place. And then we go down here, Killswitch versus TB. TB is a very strong player. However, I think Killswitch is a stronger player. So now we get to our final 6. This is what is going to be on stream. If my fantasy bracket lines up, which obviously it is very clearly not going to. But Vinny and Killswitch to await the losers of Birdo Burrito versus J King 7 and Cappuccino versus No One 5. So let's start with Birdo versus myself. I think Birdo is going to be taking this. Now, we actually met in the exact same position in the tournament last year in 2022, and Birdo took it in Game 5. Now, we went on into the next round where I defeated Birdo in the winner's side finals and went on to win the World Championship, obviously. Like, I think either player can take this. I'm not going to... Like, I don't think there's any particular reason why Birdo would have any advantage over this in this particular matchup. However, I just think this is a coin toss. And to be completely honest, I think Bodo wants it more. To be completely honest, I think Bodo deserves another chance at top 4. Now, going down to the bottom, No 5 versus Cappuccino. These are two incredibly strong players. I think, as highly as I rate Cappuccino as a player, I think No 5... Well, No 5 has been doing some weird things lately, I'm not going to lie. And he has not been showing up to as many top 6s in the last year as the past. Like, in the past, I think he did, like, 11 out of 12 top 6s. This year, I think it's, like, more like 50-50. That being said, Cappuccino has also not been super active. However, I just feel like Noah's going to be doing something weird. Like, knowing Noah, he's just going to have, like, one bizarre deck. Like, Japan-US ramp. I know he was playing that for a while. And not like Tony OTK, just like a Japan-US ramp. And I think a player like Cappuccino is going to be able to exploit that. So I think Noah is going to be dropping down into the losers bracket, which leaves us with the losers bracket of Noah 5 versus Vinny and J King versus Killswitch. So, Noah 5 versus Vinny. Ooh, I don't want to... I want both of these players in my top 4 fantasy bracket, I'm not going to lie. Now, I think if this matchup were to happen, Vinny would not have the advantage of just being really good into the meta things, for 2 reasons. One, no one is just going to high roll on any meta deck he brings, and this is just something we need to accept. And 2, the aforementioned reason I think he's going to lose to Cappuccino of, he's going to have like one really weird deck, 1 or 2 really weird decks. I think that is going to throw off Vinny's game plan. Which means, I swear I did not plan this, but that does mean that in my fantasy bracket, I have Vinny getting knocked out in the top 6 again, getting 5th again. I feel really bad about that. I think Vinny absolutely could make top 4. However, this is the way that it is. Then we have myself versus Killswitch to get into top 4. This is a rough one, because I think we are going to be playing very, very similar decks. However, there's 2 things to mention. 1, obviously, I have much more tournament experience than Killswitch. And 2, I say very, very similar decks because we are going to have some changes. Like, we're not playing identical decks, and obviously, decks haven't even been decided yet, so there's still room for them to get further apart. And if we are bringing virtually the same lineup with only a couple of card changes, obviously, I believe the changes I make is because it is better. And it doesn't necessarily mean it is better, but, like, this is what I think is better, and this is who I think is going to win. So, therefore, if we play largely mirror matchups, I think this is going to go to Game 5, but I think I'm going to take this and knock Killswitch out in 5th. Which means that here's where the bracket gets a little weird, because the bracket wants us to continue on in the losers bracket. However, in the way Kards does this is the players in the top 4 all get reset. So now we are going to reset the bracket, with Bodo Burrito versus Cappuccino, Bodo, Cappuccino, No 5, J King 7. Now this is one hell of a top 4. All right, so now that we have our final 4, again, the way they do this is, it doesn't matter if you make it in through the losers bracket or the winners bracket. Once you get to the top 4, they fly everybody out to Iceland, everything is reset, and then they essentially shuffle the seats. Like, it's random who your opponent is. So, in this case, it is going to be random. So I'm just going to hit the shuffle seeds, and then we are going to look at the bracket and go from there. All right, so here we are with the shuffled bracket, and it has B playing Bodo in the first round again. And here, I think, well, we gave it to Bodo last time, so let's give it to me this time. Then we have No 5 versus Cappuccino. This one, I mean, this is also a rematch from the previous thing. And that one I had Cappuccino taking it. Here, I think I'll have Cappuccino take it again. I really just think no one is going to bring some weird stuff, whereas Cappuccino is just going to bring standard aggro medalists. Then we have the semifinals, myself versus Cappuccino. I think I'm a little bit stronger of a player than Cappuccino, and I think Cappuccino has not been playing as recently. Then we have the first elimination, Bodo versus Noah. Now, if anybody is going to high roll Bodo out of this tournament, it would be Noah. However, I do think Bodo takes it. And then Bodo versus Cappuccino. I think Bodo is a slightly stronger player than Cappuccino, which means we get the finals of myself versus Bodo. And he took it, then I took it. I think Bodo is going to take it. Take the crown. The game wants double elimination. However, you don't have to win twice. And there we go. My fantasy bracket, I don't think I'm going to win a third time. Like, that's insane. let's be completely honest here. Winning a third time would be like ludicrously unlikely. And also, I do actually just think Birdo is easily one of the top players in this game. Even if he hasn't been playing a ton recently, I think he has a lot of skills that do not go. I don't think he's a player that relies on the meta. I think he just has a lot of fundamental skills in this game, and I think he very easily could have won the World Championship last year, and I think he very easily could win the World Championship this year, which is why I have him winning my fantasy bracket. So, with that all being said, you can follow the round of 128, which is going to be played this upcoming Saturday, which is Saturday, October the 21st, where everybody in 128 will play, and we will go down to the top 32. And then on the next day, Sunday the 22nd, all of top 32 will play down to top 6, which is a lot of games. This is like, for most people, like this very easily could be like 13 to 15 best of 5 sets of cards, like competitive cards, in a like 36 hours period, which is insane. This is going to be a grueling tournament for everybody. That is something to keep in mind. And then, so by Sunday, the October 22nd, so 8 days from the point of recording, we will know our top 6. And then on the following weekend, on, I believe the following Sunday, the 29th, is going to be live streamed on the official Cards channel. Everybody will have an opportunity to switch decks again. And we are going to stream the entirety of top 6. So we're going to see which of the top 6 players move on into the top 4, which players are going to be going to Iceland, and then there's going to be about a month-long break, about a 5-week break to be exact, and then in early December, there's going to be a 2-day live stream from Iceland with a full bunker. They're going to fly out the casters, there's going to be a set, and the players are going to play against each other face-to-face across the table for the first time in 2 years. And it is going to be awesome, and I highly recommend tuning in. It's the first weekend of December to the official Cards Twitch channel. It's going to be awesome. Playing in Iceland in person was one of the greatest experiences of my life. It absolutely changes the way you look at the game and the way you play the game, and it is an amazing opportunity. And if I don't get to do it again, I very much hope that other people get to enjoy that as well. I'm very glad that other people are going to get to enjoy that as well. At the end of the day, I just hope the top 4, the top 6, are players who deserve to be there, are players that really earned their way there. And if they're not players we recognize, it's players we come to recognize. Because I think that's really great. Worlds is an opportunity for new players to make a name for themselves. It's an opportunity for players we know to really solidify their legacy. So yeah, that is my hope for Worlds. Let me know if you disagree with me anywhere in this tournament. I'm sure everybody disagrees with me at least somewhere in this fantasy bracket. If you want to go through the time, feel free to post your own fantasy bracket, or at least your like fantasy, I don't know, top 6, top 8 or so, in my Discord, or just write in the comments, who do you think is going to be winning this? Who do you have in your top 4? Who do you think are your favorites, etc. Subscribe if you haven't already to see more gameplay or updates to the Cards competitive scene, and join my Discord if you haven't already to stay up to date on what I'm doing and what's happening in Cards. So, thank you very much for watching if you got through this video, and I will catch you in the next one.